all I wanted. There was something inexplicably tragic about learning the similarities between what Easton and I had been going through. Perhaps in a parallel world, we could have been perfect for one another, the support systems that understood the unexplainable. But neither of us had trusted the other enough to pull back that curtain when it could have made a difference. I believe we ultimately were two people who never truly saw one another. Something inside us both had been broken, and in our own ways, we scrambled to appear whole in a community where happiness was a function of virtue. I was slowly realizing that the Easton I loved never existed. He was a fabrication of my mind, a compilation of my hopes and dreams stenciled onto a single perfect person that had no trauma or shortcomings. I was incapable of seeing him for him. I could only see a savior who had stepped in for God and become my religion. The real Easton was an ordinary college student, full of hopes, dreams, bitter disappointments, and traumatizing memories. He also had a crazy, not quite ex-boyfriend who responds to rejection by writing books. I'm really glad I don't have an ex that crazy. Months passed. I gradually stepped into a new relationship at USU, having met a boy who seemed to think my writing was cool. That was kind of weird, to be honest, but I was willing to give him a try. I had no interest in rushing with him. I wanted to do things right this time, and so did he. Obviously, I brought a disproportionate amount of baggage into the relationship. Yes, I was still getting over Easton, but there was more. I had no ward, community, or friends. This was the loneliest period of my life. All I had in terms of a social life was a new relationship I felt unworthy of pursuing. My memories of Claire made me afraid to touch him, or tell him my feelings. He was patient with me, knowing something had happened at BYU, but he never pressed too hard. I had only vaguely hinted about what happened with Claire to a handful of people. Trying to sort out my life at BYU had allowed me to postpone dealing with those feelings. I had buried the memories, unable to tell anyone that might have helped me. I simply didn't have the vocabulary to make people understand. But now that I had moved, I was alone with the memories, and I had no idea what to do with them. It had happened. She had done that. Was there a point? Was there a lesson to be learned? Maybe there was only hurt and bitter feelings. I wish I could say that I conveniently learned the right words to say to my new boyfriend, like a character in a book that's running out of pages. But that's not what happened. I had to come to terms with it in my own way. Writing had always been my outlet, something mine, something controllable and safe. When writing, I could experience humanity in the abstract, piecing together both what it meant to be human and why humans did the things they do. Writing this book was all of that, and so much more. Having finished my science fiction book, I wasted no time in starting this one. I deconstructed myself, and explored my trauma in the only way I understood, fingers on a keyboard. Much of my outline was already done, but now the real work began. I pinned a date to my every interaction with Claire, identifying which instances of assault were the most significant. I examined them beat for beat and from every angle. I could play each memory in my head like a movie. No book has ever been easier and harder to write. I spared no detail, somehow needing it to be my exact experience, knowing this was my only way out of the thoughts. It didn't get better. It reopened the wounds and sent me into a depressive slump. My work broke me to the point where my new boyfriend at USU suggested I take a step back from the book. He didn't understand, even though he came from a place of love. This was something I needed to put down on paper, now, while the memory still played on my head in repeat. I pressed forward in writing, finishing the book in 2 months, an initial draft of 90,000 words. I had worked into the early hours of the morning, typing away on my computer. I sent it to my boyfriend as an email, downplaying the contents within. I still didn't know if I was right in saying that what I had gone through with Claire could be difficult. I was a man. Claire was 4 years my junior. Maybe my new boyfriend would read the book and shrug. Maybe I had overreacted and erroneously turned it into a big deal in my mind. We met up on campus the next day. He looked at me with new eyes and hugged me. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea what it was like for you." He had read through the night and finished in one sitting. Shock turned to relief as I let him hold me in his arms. I wasn't crazy. My relationship with Claire had been hard, unfair, abusive, and manipulative. Finally, someone else knew every detail and helped center me on what I thought was true. I sobbed into his chest, finally having communicated in my own way, through writing, the words I could not say. I began to forget the memories after that. I had written everything down into something containable that I could hold in my hand and say, "This is what happened. This is how I became me." And finally, I allowed myself to let go, to accept the complexity and messiness of life, and pressed forward. My depression faded. The process was slow enough that it's hard to say when I considered myself to have come out of it. I allowed myself to move on, but not in full. I drove home to Mom's house on President's Day weekend of 2017. As became my practice when home, I downloaded Tinder and began swiping through profiles of both men and women. This had become my guilty pleasure, despite my new relationship. I never met up with anyone. It was an ego boost, a way for me to reaffirm that I was worth liking, a way of reaffirming to myself that some people found me attractive. I had a boyfriend. We were happy. I should be above this. I wasn't. On Saturday, Easton's profile appeared on my Tinder, and I understood the motivation behind my actions. I had been looking for him, unwilling to admit the truth to myself. I refused to let him go. The ghost of his memory still had a holding on my life and actions. My stomach sank when his picture appeared, and I realized this unsettling truth. I set my phone down and walked away. Mom had just left for church, meaning I would have several hours to ruminate over this latest grenade to my life. To distract myself, I went on a walk, alone. I came home and tried to read. When that failed, I tried writing. Then video games. Netflix. Anything to keep my mind off my phone, sitting a room away with Easton's smiling picture glaring up from the screen. Unable to take any more, I turned the TV off and walked to my phone. Easton smiled up at me through the screen, taunting. What if I swiped right and nothing happened? He wouldn't swipe right as well. Rejection all over again without a single word said. I set the phone down, walked away, came back. Who was I kidding? I was going to swipe right, rejection or no. I swiped. It's a match. His picture appeared alongside mine. Disgusted with myself, I dropped my phone and walked away. Everything I had worked to build these past months was already crumbling apart as I rushed back to Easton. I paced into the kitchen, sat down at my computer, and tried to write. His text appeared on my laptop with a loud ding. He still had my number. Easton. So I see we matched on Tinder again. TBH, you popped up on my account about a week ago, and I debated for a while whether or not to swipe right, so I just let it sit until last night. Anyway, it kind of gave me some time to think. I wanted to apologize for how I treated you last year. It wasn't good of me to just cut you off completely. It was actually kind of rude of me to do that. You really didn't do anything wrong. I appreciated your voice message you sent back in August. I was in the middle of dating someone then, so I tried not to think about it too much, TBH, but I saved it and have listened to it periodically since then. I listened to it again today when I saw we matched. Do you remember what you said in that recording? How do you respond to something like that? Like, obviously I remember, because I've only thought about it every day since. But I'd never tell him because that would make me look like a crazy psycho stalker. And I definitely didn't want that. So I obviously had to give away nothing here. Me. I do. Easton. How do you feel now? Me. I still have some feelings for you, to be honest, but I'm in a better spot emotionally than I was back in August. Easton. How do you feel about the idea that a person's feelings can change over time? Me. I would say that's true. Easton. Okay, because I feel like that may be what I'm feeling. A lot of stuff was happening when I first met you and throughout this past year, and it's kind of changed my views. I had to work through some serious shit, and I think you took the brunt of that because you were the only one really there at the time. Do you ever make it down to Salt Lake? I'd really like to meet up and talk about things. If not, that's totally fine, but I would like to explain. Me. I have tomorrow off. We could meet up sometime. Easton. That would be great. Maybe we can meet up for lunch. Do you like sushi? I drove down to Salt Lake, hating myself for what I was doing. Upending your life always has a certain scary ambiguity. When I went on my first gay date, the ambiguity was wonderful. I felt like I could only go up. In this new situation, I felt only fear and regret. By doing this, I was sacrificing something. My life at USU had just begun. I was dating someone, and for the first time, it felt stable. What would I gain in sacrificing that? Why pursue the uncertain possibility of a relationship with someone I likely never understood? Worse, Easton's text seemed to indicate he wanted restitution. Something could happen here, or not. Either way, I felt unprepared. I could say something technical, like my body was having a physiological response to Easton that my mind was misappropriating as love or longing. Thoughts of Easton had put me on a sort of high ever since I snuck into USGA and sat in the back row, alone, skittish, afraid, and traumatized by my relationship with Claire. Talking with him that first time relieved a lifetime of stress. For a brief, glorious moment, I knew everything would be all right. I could explain how he became a symbol of hope, optimism, and sympathy in my mind, all because of our chance meeting. I could say any of this, but people don't think in those terms. I wanted to see Easton. So I drove to Salt Lake City, against my better judgment.